Okay, so just know about the Brooks and Sumner situation, and just like a funny thing. So Preston Brooks, after this happened, he broke his cane in by beating this guy so much with it, and word got out about that, and all these Southerners sent him all these fancy canes, some with like gold and jewels on it and all this stuff, that because they regarded him as a hero. And again, just this is shows the division in Congress over this, that people in Congress are supposed to be the finer people in society, and if they're coming to blows over this, then what is the rest of the world doing here? So that's the question. All right, and then the other thing you need to know about is the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott is a slave who had traveled around with his owner, and his owner had lived in states that were free. I think Illinois, and maybe I want to say Wisconsin, for a long time. But anyway, up in the Midwest, he had lived in states above the Missouri Compromise line long enough to be free. I mean, he still worked for his owner, but he could enjoy a little bit more freedom in those areas. So his idea was, well, if I'm free here, why can't I be free when I come back? I'm the same person. I don't understand. So he sues for his freedom, and it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And it ends up, at the time, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is Roger Taney. I know it's spelled like this, but it's pronounced Taney. And he says that Dred Scott is not even a citizen, so he can't even bring such a case to court. He doesn't even know how he got all the way to the Supreme Court. And he says, you're not even a citizen of the United States, so I'm not even entertaining this. So this was a huge blow to the abolitionist movement, because this is a branch of the government, the Supreme Court, the judicial branch of the government, is saying that slaves are not even citizens. And and this is 1857, so this is pretty late for that kind of mentality. And he's the Chief Justice of the United States, and he says this. So this was very concerning to the North when this happened. And they felt like the kind of the oligarchy and the aristocracy of the South, that mentality was permeated in the Supreme Court. And Taney was kind of a bugger. Lincoln kind of is going to butt heads with him too when he becomes president. He's a little bit difficult, and that was just his point of view. So again, you always have to know people's points of view. So Taney, his point of view is that black people, black persons are not citizens, slaves are not citizens, and he is not really looking to do anything to help the abolitionist movement. Okay. All right. So Dred Scott. Here is Dred Scott. Ironically, not too long after the case, he passes away. And then his wife lives on, and I believe the owner does eventually free the rest of his family. But Dred Scott himself did die not too long, and he never did get to see the war and the 13th Amendment and all that stuff. Okay, so this is what I was saying earlier, girls. Don't make the mistake that a lot of people make, that they think Lincoln was an abolitionist in the beginning. He found slavery to be deplorable. He remembered growing up in Kentucky, walking. In fact, there's comments he's made, there's writing about this, that he walked past the slave traders, and it was the most disturbing thing he had ever seen as a kid. And his family would never be a family to own slaves. They were poor, very poor. So again, he's just a regular yeoman farmer kind of guy. He doesn't like it. But his biggest thing right now is, let's not spread it. And let's keep the Union together. He even says, a house divided cannot stand on itself. So if we're going to be all slavery, fine, we'll be all slave. If we're going to be all not slave, be all not slave. His biggest priority is keeping the Union together, not extending it any further. But it wasn't as though he was a bleeding heart abolitionist. In fact, I might have said this already, but he kind of fell prey to a lot of the racial hierarchical thinking of the day, that people based upon race were suited for certain things, and he kind of believed that that he didn't know what would happen once the slaves were free. And he kind of progresses as time goes on and does emancipate the slaves and changes his mindset a little bit, but don't going into it politically, he is very cautious not to be too abolitionist in his speech, because you would lose a lot of the South in the votes for that. And I already talked about this before, that why they call him the rail splitter. He worked, so he's a hard worker. He did all kinds of manual labor. He comes from very modest beginnings. Okay. All right, and there he is. And here's Stephen Douglas. I told you who he had the debates with. These are very early photographs. Photography is still a new thing. The other thing you need to know about is John Brown's raid at Harper's Ferry. So John Brown is here. He was a white man who was a staunch abolitionist, and he and his sons, I think he had like 5 sons, are going to go out to the Kansas-Nebraska area. And, well, there's 2, Harper's Ferry's in Virginia. This is later, but before this, before his raid at Harper's Ferry, he has an attack at Pottawatomie Creek in the Kansas-Nebraska area, where he and some abolitionists hacked to death some pro-slavery people. So he is killing people in what he thinks certainly is a good cause, but he is seen by many as a murderer, but he does it in the name of abolition. Okay, so he has that one attack out there, then he comes back, and Harper's Ferry is actually an arsenal where the government keeps weapons, and he and some people, I think his sons and some other people, go and have a raid at Harper's Ferry. John Brown's problem was that he thought all the slaves were going to rise up with him, but they weren't able to, or they did not. And he kills a bunch of pro-slavery people in that area and is captured by the militia, and he is executed. And his execution is seen by the North as like martyrdom, like he is a martyr. And he was murdered by the South in their views. And the South views him as a murderer and a killer. And so this causes more split. This causes more sectionalism. And you see the South kind of, this gives them something to rally behind. You know, nothing, I always say, girls, nothing brings people together like a common enemy. So the common enemy here is John Brown, and the Southerners are going to rally behind that. Okay. And the Northerners are going to view him almost as a saint for killing people in the name of a good cause. Okay. But he still murdered a bunch of people. This is Harper's Ferry. Okay. It's a federal arsenal. An arsenal is a place where weapons are stored. Okay. That's in Virginia. Okay. Actually, oh, now it's West Virginia, because of where I told you West Virginia is going to break apart because they don't care about slavery, because they're too poor to ever own slaves in Appalachia. Okay. They don't care. They're on their own little world. Okay. All right. So the election of 1860 is the final thing. So Lincoln is nominated by the Republicans. This is a weird election because there's 4 people, because there's some different parties. So Lincoln runs as the Republican, Breckinridge runs as the Southern Democrat. And by the way, the split of the Democratic Party, what happens when you split a party? You are going to give, you're going to split the votes among Democrats, and it gives the Republicans an advantage. We see this happen again. If you want to compare this to something, to another time period, when Teddy Roosevelt runs, he decides to come out of retirement and runs for president on a ticket called the Bull Moose ticket, this party he creates against, but he's really a Republican. He really is. It just changes the name because he wants to run. The Republicans had chosen William Howard Taft, and then Woodrow Wilson runs as a Democrat. Well, what those two do, Taft and Roosevelt, they had a falling out, but really what they had done is they opened up an opportunity for Wilson, because all the Republicans split their votes between the more progressive Republicans for Roosevelt, and the other ones voted for Taft, and then who won? Woodrow Wilson, and that was in the election of 1912. Now we have a similar situation. So the Southern Democrats, and what are they split over, the Democrats? Well, of course, it's the issue of slavery. Douglas does get the nomination by the Northern Democrats. The Democratic Party itself didn't really want him because he was too he had too negative a reputation because of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So you see the Democrats split, and the Southerners pick Breckinridge. There was this Constitutional Union Party very briefly, and they picked this guy Bell. Well, Lincoln wins by a large majority. So now you see the South had said, if a Republican wins the election of 1860, they're out and they're going to start seceding one by one. So the final step on the road to secession is the election of 1860. Okay, who secedes first? I told you the other day would be South Carolina. They've been bitter ever since the Tariff of Abominations, and they are going to secede first, and slowly a bunch of southern states will secede. Here is Liberty Cap, shockingly. Ooh, this here is a symbol for fascism. That's concerning. But this, so that's interesting. So, okay, so this is supposed to be Lady Liberty. And then the North and the South kind of divided. So it's an allegory of the North and the South. And this was painted in 1858. So the figure here is Lady Liberty, wearing, of course, the Liberty cap. This is the South here, and this is cotton, a bale of cotton that's wrapped up, and you can see slaves here, okay? And then over here, you see much more intelligence here. This is a book. The North was much more progressed in education, and you can also see a mill in the back. I think there's a reference to a church in the back, the bounty of all the things they're growing in the North. Okay, so it's interesting to see, though, why. That's weird. I'm going to look that up. But fascism is usually a bad thing. But sometimes that means this is a symbol for unity. But I guess it can be extreme when they talk about fascism. But basically, it's all these reeds bundled together. This comes from an ancient Roman thing. All these reeds bundled together show unity. So she's holding this because she's the federal government, the national government. Okay. All right. And then the war came as the states slowly seceded. As I said, South Carolina is first. You can look up the order in which they secede. It's not super important, but a bunch of them do. Those that don't, that are in the area, are going to be border states, and we'll talk about that. Here's Georgia calling for secession. Who is president? Now, girls, don't forget, Lincoln is elected in 1860, but he's not going to get inaugurated until March. The inauguration date was still March 20th. That doesn't change until later. So James Buchanan has a really long lame duck period, and he doesn't do anything. So you can compare this to other, if you think about Jackson and the Bank War, and Jackson and the force bill with the nullification crisis, he would have sent troops in. He would have went ballistic if people tried to secede on his watch. Like he might have agreed with maybe why they were, but nobody was going to do that while he was president. But Buchanan was not that kind of a guy. And Buchanan's like looking at the Constitution and he's saying, well, it doesn't say they can't, and it doesn't say I can do anything to stop them. So he really does nothing to stop them. And he's on his way out. So the mess really becomes Lincoln's when he comes into office and gets sworn in. So these states start seceding right after the election in November. By the time Lincoln comes in, it's a mess. So James Buchanan's reaction is, constitutionally, he feels that there's nothing he can do to stop these states if that's what they want to do. And he's not going to send in troops. He's not going to do anything. So it's just going to fester until Lincoln is inaugurated. So that's going to be it for chapter 13. I'm going to do one more thing with a little bit the beginning of 14, so we're not behind, because we're already behind. So if I were you, I would read up on chapter 14 too, and we'll pick up and hit the ground running tomorrow, like in the middle of chapter 14. Okay.